In December of 2018, the winds of change had blown through Chapel Hill at gale forces. Gone were Larry Fedora and his staff, and the sour feeling of a second straight bad season. In their place were Mack Brown, a new group of excited assistant coaches, and the reliable sense of optimism that springs up during an off-season. But perhaps no single event during that period signaled transformation more than the day that Sam Howell decided to become a Tar Heel. I'm Joey Powell, and on this, the first episode of a new InsideCarolina.com podcast called The Backstory, we're going to examine the events that led Sam Howell to go from a Florida State commitment to being the first true freshman to ever start at quarterback in a season opener for the North Carolina football team. A top 100 recruit in his class, Sam Howell had been a 4-year starter at Sun Valley High School in Monroe, North Carolina. He did face a brief battle for the starting quarterback role his freshman season, but he'd been the school's #1 signal caller ever since. I spent some time talking with Sam's father, Duke Howell, who serves as the offensive coordinator for Sun Valley's football team. Duke gave some insight into just how his son is motivated. He's always wanting to be the best version of himself, Duke said. He's always competing against himself first and foremost. Sam took advantage of his opportunity at North Carolina very early on, and literally. He enrolled early in January of 2019 and began his freshman year of college so that he could take part in spring practice, which was Coach Mack Brown's first in his return to Chapel Hill. Now, some folks close to the program assumed that Howell would be the chosen one the moment that he signed. After all, this is a blue-chip recruit from an in-state metro area who Mack Brown had flipped from a marquee program to Carolina. But when asked about how he and Sam envisioned the spring quarterback competition, Duke shared that there had been no promises to start made to Sam on the recruiting trail by anyone of the Carolina staff. However, Brown and offensive coordinator Phil Longo did say that he'd have an opportunity to earn the job. While North Carolina had been the first school to come visit Sam Howell in high school, Longo had also recruited Sam to Ole Miss during his previous tenure there. Duke Howell remembers just how passionate Longo was about Sam, with Longo promising that if Sam performed, he'd have a chance to start. So, spring football starts in Chapel Hill. You've got a new coach, a new staff, and an all-new vibe, and tons of new faces under the helmets as well. UNC also had some unsettled positional situations. 2018 quarterback and upperclassman Nathan Elliott had opted to transfer. Former quarterback Chaz Surratt was going to try his hand as a linebacker. That left you with Jace Reuter, Cade Fortin, and Sam as the only scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. Duke had a chance to come up and watch his son during spring practice. He and Sam were both impressed by the talent of the other young quarterbacks. Sam was also quickly becoming aware of just how much faster the college game was. Duke would counsel his son regularly to put your head down and earn it. Coaches often lament just how quickly spring football comes and goes. Specifically, as UNC was installing an entirely new playbook, and in all phases of the game, the weeks and days evaporated seemingly at warp speed. It was during these days of learning and repetition that Sam began to recognize the opportunity that lay before him. He would acknowledge to his father just how good Cade and Jace were reading and understanding what the new offensive system required. Meanwhile, offensive coordinator Phil Longo felt that Howell was really, quote, starting to get it. Over and over, I've heard stories about Sam's motivation and just where the drive for performance comes from. The sources around Sam who contributed to this podcast mentioned two things to me regularly: his constant desire to improve and his, quote, obsession with learning the game. Very rarely do you hear of teenagers being authentically and organically interested with watching film at that early phase of their career. But with Sam Howell, it's just as regular of a routine as eating a meal or even breathing. He would watch film in high school of his opponents, of his team, and of himself. He would spend time with his trainer, former Duke quarterback Anthony Boone, reviewing film and learning to read progressions. Besides, with the air raid style of offense that Phil Longo would employ at Carolina, an incredible amount of responsibility lies with the quarterback. The decision to run or pass on any given play rests with him, based on how he diagnoses the defense's presentation. But larger than reading what the defensive pre-snap read tells him, Longo's quarterbacks have to have a firm and total grasp of what the options in the called play are. If you combine that with Sam Howell's proclivity to learn and understand the nuances of the game of football, then you can begin to piece together how well he would fit in this offense. Additionally, Sam's desire to improve and grow would push for early dividends. As North Carolina spring practice culminated in the annual spring game inter-squad scrimmage, Fortin, Reuter, and Howell continued to split reps behind center. Howell's spring game stats included a touchdown and an interception and over 100 passing yards. Still, the end of spring ball gave no real indicator of separation between the three. Coach Brown was steadfast in his desire to still learn more about what he had at the position, and he remarked that all three players had shown flashes and were good. This staff was giving an honest tryout to all three guys, and all three guys were doing some positive things. During the summer, Sam continued to binge on film, watching spring cut-ups, other video of Longo's offense, as well as defensive schemes that would broaden his understanding of what he'd see in the fall. He continued to work in the weight room with Coach Hess on the physical attributes that he needed to withstand the college game. He asked questions often. He spent time with older teammates on the offensive line, learning about protection specifically from Charlie Heck. Describing Howell's unwavering quest for understanding on any given subject, his dad asserted, "He's going to sit there with you until he gets answers, whether it's face-to-face or on tape." Whatever Sam Howell did that offseason, it was singularly focused on self-improvement in football. As the UNC football team began to report back to Chapel Hill for fall camp, most of the focus from fans and the outside world was on the quarterback position. While the coaching staff was in no rush to make a decision, other guys in the locker room had taken notice of Sam Howell. When asked about how Howell had earned his teammates' trust, Mack Brown would later share, "I think he earned it this summer. From listening to them in the player-led practices, they all said he worked so hard." The grind of fall practice is on, and Sam Howell is taking reps with the first team rather regularly. He told his dad that the game had started to slow down a bit from the chaotic pace it showed in the spring, but Sam was still never sure he was going to get the starting job. Maybe this was a symptom of his inner drive continuing to demand improvement. Regardless, his performance showed that all of the behind-the-scenes work was absolutely paying off. After a fall practice, Phil Longo said of Howell, "He's probably throwing the ball the best. He does have the ability to run the football, and he's done an incredible job learning the system." Privately, folks around the program and around Sam felt that the freshman was pulling away from his competition. After fall camp ended, the Tar Heels began their game prep for the opener against South Carolina. During that minor transition on August 18th, Mack Brown announced to the media that Sam Howell would begin taking all of the reps with the first team in practice. Explaining his process, Brown shared, "We felt like if it was going to be Sam for sure, we didn't need to announce him the day before the game or the day of the game. He needed to have felt that for 10 days or 2 weeks that he was the guy and to get comfortable with it." This was the first public indicator the UNC staff had acknowledged separation at the position. 2 days later, the competition dwindled by one participant when Cade Fortin announced that he'd be entering the NCAA's transfer portal. Meanwhile, this new squad of Tar Heels was barreling towards the first game. So game week arrives, and on August 26, Coach Brown confirmed what the previous week had indicated, that Sam Howell was going to be the Tar Heels starting quarterback. Even before taking an in-game snap, Howell's name would be etched into Carolina football history, as no true freshman had ever been named such. Now, while privately Sam may have never been sure he'd start from game one, he did show confidence to those around him. "I think I have the arm strength to make every single throw that needs to be made on the field," Howell remarked to Inside Carolina's Greg Barnes after being tabbed the starter. Anthony Boone wasn't surprised at all that his pupil would lead the Tar Heels out for their first game. "He's about his business. He doesn't talk a lot. He's not flashy. He's a guy that you build your program around. He's going to study his stuff. He's a kid that is going to do what he's supposed to do and what he has to do, and do a lot of extra stuff to get where he needs to get to. And honestly, that's probably why he's become the starter as a true freshman. He's only scratched the surface of what he's going to be the next 4 years." Now, y'all, using the luxury of hindsight and learning what I've learned about Sam's personal drive and motivation, it doesn't shock me in the slightest that he won the starting quarterback job as a freshman. When you take that and combine it with what he did on the field in 2019, it's even less surprising. So, at around 3:30 Eastern, on August the 31st, 2019, a true freshman trotted off the sideline to command the UNC offense against an interstate rival in South Carolina. You likely know how that game and how Sam Howell's first season turned out. But now, you've got the backstory. If you'd like to learn more about this story, be sure to search Inside Carolina's archives. Special thanks to Duke Howell, Greg Barnes, and Ross Martin for contributing to this podcast, and to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. For InsideCarolina.com, I'm Joey Powell. I'll catch you next time.